A widowed rancher thought his wife died years ago, until twin girls walked in and called him Pa. Under the wide, washed sky of late autumn, Eli Harper worked alone. The field stretched in every direction, pale gold and silent except for the whistle of the wind through cedar posts and the distant croak of crows. His land had grown quiet since Esther died, and quiet suited him. He mended fences with the steadiness of habit, never hurrying, never speaking. When the sun dipped and the wind cooled, he'd ride home to his cabin, eat in silence, and let the lantern burn beside the small photograph of his wife. Her smile had faded under the glass years ago, but he could still trace the shape of it with his thumb, a smile that once held a whole world inside it. He did not expect visitors that evening, least of all the kind that came stumbling through the cold mist. 2 little girls, no taller than the rails he was fixing. They stood by the gate, shivering, their dresses torn, their cheeks streaked with dirt. One held a small shawl close to her chest. The other clutched a leather strap with a locket hanging from it. Their boots were too big, and their voices too small when one of them spoke his name. Pa. Eli thought he'd misheard, that the wind had tricked him. But then it came again, soft and certain. Pa. He froze, one hand gripping the fence post, heart beating louder than it had in years. The girls looked at him with eyes that held a strange knowing, as if they'd stepped out of a memory he'd forgotten. He wanted to tell them they were mistaken, that he wasn't their pa, but something in him refused to speak the lie. They were hungry, that much was plain. He brought them inside, wordless, and set a pot of stew to warm. They sat near the fire, staring around at the cabin walls like they'd found shelter in a dream. The smaller one, maybe by a minute or two, asked if he always lived alone. He said yes, since before they were born, though the words stumbled out as if they were unsteady on their feet. They told him their names, Mira and May. They remembered little else, a woman they called Essie, a river, the sound of thunder. They said she told them to find Pa Eli if anything ever happened. The names sounded strange on their tongues, too real to dismiss. That night, he gave them the loft bed and sat by the fire until dawn, watching the shadows shift across the floorboards. He didn't sleep. The girl's soft breathing carried through the still air like a lullaby he hadn't heard in 5 long years. The days that followed stitched themselves into something new. He found shoes for them in town, mended their clothes, taught them how to brush the horses and stack kindling. Mira was bold and quick, always climbing where she shouldn't. May was quieter, careful, watching him with the same wide eyes Esther once had when trying to read his silences. They filled the house with sound, questions, laughter, little songs that tangled with the breeze. At first, Eli told himself they were only passing through, that he was helping until someone came to claim them. But no one came. Winter swept across the plains, and by the time the first snow fell, the cabin had changed. The girls' drawings covered the walls near the stove. Their small coats hung beside his on the peg. He began to hear Pa not as a mistake, but as a word that had found its home again. In town, folks started to talk. Old Hank from the store said it was good to see Eli smiling again. Mrs. Della, the widow who ran the bakery, brought ribbons for the girls' hair. He noticed how people softened around him now, as if the years of distance had thinned. Still, questions stirred beneath the quiet. The girls knew songs Esther used to hum when she kneaded bread, tunes she'd learned from her mother. Once, when the fire was dying low, May lifted her shawl to show a locket she wore. Inside was a faded scrap of paper, the ink smeared, but the letters clear enough to make his heart twist. To my girls, find your pa if the road grows dark. The handwriting was Esther's. He would have known it anywhere. That night, sleep would not come. He sat on the porch, snow whispering against the steps, and stared out into the emptiness. If the girls were Esther's, if they were his, what did that mean for the years he'd spent grieving a ghost? He wanted to deny it, to protect the fragile peace that had finally taken root in his heart. But every time one of them smiled, every time their laughter shook the dust from his home, he saw her. The same spark in the eyes, the same stubborn tilt of the chin. Spring thawed the ground, and the doubts grew stronger. One afternoon, while tending the barn, Eli heard Mira humming that same lullaby again, the one Esther sang the night before the flood took her. He stopped mid-step. The tune carried him backward to the memory he could never shake. Esther on the porch, the river rising behind her, their voices tangled with the coming storm. He turned toward the sound. The girls were plaiting the mane of his old horse, sunlight catching in their hair. The sight undid something inside him. He knew then that the truth was no longer a thing he could avoid. The next day, he rode into town to ask the postmaster if any letters had ever come for him after the flood. The old man rummaged through dusty drawers and handed him a small, water-stained envelope that had never been delivered, the address smudged, but his name still legible. The writing was shaky, but unmistakably hers. He opened it right there on the porch of the post office, hands trembling. Eli. It read, "The river carried me farther than I can say. I was hurt, but I'm alive. If you find this, know that I have our daughters with me. I will come back when the roads are kind again. Until then, keep faith. You are not alone." The paper blurred as the words sank in. He had buried her in his mind, mourned her every morning for 5 years, and all the while she had been breathing under the same sky, raising the very children now sleeping in his loft. When he rode home, the hills looked different, brighter somehow, as if they too had heard the news. The twins ran to meet him at the gate, their dresses stained with wildflower petals, their hands outstretched. He lifted them both in his arms, one on each side, and felt the solid weight of everything he'd almost lost. He wanted to tell them the truth, but the words caught in his throat. They were too young to understand, and perhaps too innocent to need the burden of that story yet. That night, he tucked them in and watched the slow rise and fall of their breathing. He placed the locket beside their bed and whispered a promise he hadn't made in years. Tomorrow he would begin searching for Esther. Outside, the wind softened. The moon broke through the clouds, spilling silver light over the land. For the first time since the flood, Eli Harper felt something like hope stirring inside him, quiet, unfamiliar, and dangerous in its beauty. He didn't know if he'd find her. He didn't know what she'd become, or if she'd want to be found. But he knew this: the girls had not come to him by chance. They were the answer to a prayer he had stopped praying. The fire dimmed to embers. He sat in the silence that followed and let his heart begin to unlearn the years of mourning. By dawn, the first light touched the horizon, painting the prairie gold again. The twins still slept, their faces soft, their small hands curled as if holding dreams. Eli rose, saddled his horse, and looked once more at the cabin. The smoke rising, the field stretching wide, the world waiting. Some stories, he thought, don't end when you think they do. They wait, like seeds under winter ground, for the right season to begin again. And so he rode toward that beginning, the wind at his back, the ghosts finally quiet. The morning light came slow across the plains, a pale wash of gold spilling over the ridges and settling on the lonely shape of a man mending a fence. Eli Harper had been awake since before dawn, same as every day. His hands worked by habit now, steady, deliberate, unhurried. The ranch didn't need him the way it once had. It only gave him something to do with the hours. A man alone learns to measure time by the creak of a saddle, by the ring of a hammer on a nail, by the sun slipping from one edge of the sky to the other. 5 years had passed since the river took Esther. 5 years since her name last crossed his lips. He didn't speak much anymore. There was no one to hear him but the horses and the wind. The cabin stood small and plain on a slope overlooking the open land, smoke curling from its chimney like a thin prayer. Inside, the air always carried the faint smell of cedar and smoke, the smell of years spent alone. On the mantel sat the only photograph he had left of her, Esther in her wedding dress, sunlight on her hair, eyes half shy, half laughing. The edges of the photograph had yellowed, and the glass was cracked across her face, but Eli couldn't bring himself to hide it away. He looked at it every night, as if staring long enough might bridge the distance between this world and the next. That afternoon, the wind changed. It came sharper, colder, bringing a faint scent of rain. Eli had just finished patching the last section of fence when he noticed movement on the ridge, a flicker of color against the gray sweep of land. 2 small figures were walking toward him, slow and uncertain, stopping often as if unsure they were welcome. As they drew closer, he saw they were children, girls, no older than 5 or 6, their hair tangled, faces streaked with dust. One of them carried a small bundle tied in cloth. The other clutched a worn locket that swung against her chest when she moved. Eli stepped forward, his shadow long across the dirt. "You lost?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. The smaller girl looked up at him, eyes the color of rainwater. "Pa," she said, barely above a whisper. The word struck him like a blow. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "What did you say?" "Pa," she repeated, firmer this time, and the other one nodded beside her, mirroring the word like a prayer they both knew. Eli's throat tightened. For a long moment he could only stare, caught between disbelief and something deeper he didn't dare name. The girls stood there trembling, their thin arms wrapped around each other. Whether out of pity or instinct, he opened the gate. "Come on in," he said softly. "Let's get you warm." Inside the cabin, the girls sat near the fire while he ladled stew from a pot. They ate in silence, too hungry for talk. When their bowls were empty, Eli asked where they'd come from, if someone was looking for them. They shook their heads. The older one spoke then, her voice small but steady. Their names were Mira and May. They had been traveling with a woman named Essie, she said, but there had been trouble on the road, and when they woke, Essie was gone. She said if we ever got lost, we should find Pa Eli, Mira added, as if repeating something sacred. Eli's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. "Pa Eli." May nodded. "That's you, ain't it?" He didn't answer. The fire popped in the silence. After a long while he stood, took 2 folded quilts from the chest, and spread them on the floor near the hearth. "You can sleep there tonight," he said. "We'll figure the rest in the morning." When he lay down later, he couldn't sleep. The girl's breathing was soft and even, the sound oddly comforting. He kept turning the name Essie over in his mind. It was too close, too near the name he had buried with every hope he once had. Days folded into weeks. The girls stayed. No one came asking after them, and Eli found he didn't try too hard to find who might. The town was 2 days' ride, and he only went when supplies ran low. Mira and May followed him everywhere, into the barn, down to the creek, across the pasture. He taught them how to feed the horses, how to patch a torn bridle, how to whistle to bring the dog in from the fields. They were quick learners, sharp-eyed and stubborn. He saw pieces of Esther in them, the tilt of the chin, the same way of squinting when they laughed. At first, he told himself it was just a trick of memory. Grief plays strange games. But the more he looked, the harder it was to ignore. Sometimes May would hum a tune under her breath, a lullaby Esther used to sing when the lamps were low. Sometimes Mira would ask questions that cut too close, about rivers, about floods, about why he kept a broken photograph on the mantel. He never answered, only smiled faintly and told them to mind their chores. But inside, unease grew like a weed. Winter came down hard that year, wind rattling the windows until the glass sang. The girls made the cabin brighter, somehow, filling it with noise and motion, soft voices, laughter that startled the silence. Eli began to catch himself waiting for their footsteps, for their laughter to roll through the rooms like sunlight. The loneliness that had once been his armor now felt like a thing he'd outgrown. Still, the questions gnawed. Who were they really? What did it mean that they'd come here, to him, speaking a name they should not have known? One night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Eli sat by the fire, turning the locket over in his hands. May had left it on the table, its chain tangled. He meant only to fix it, but curiosity won. He opened the small clasp and found inside a folded scrap of paper. The ink was faded, the edges worn soft, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "If ever we are parted, find Eli Harper. He will know what to do." The letters trembled in his vision. His breath caught. There was no mistaking it now. Esther's hand. Her words. He read them again and again until the lines blurred. She was alive. She had been alive long enough to write this. He felt the room sway around him, the years of silence suddenly heavy with possibility. At dawn, the girls came down from the loft, their hair wild from sleep. He watched them eat breakfast, watched the way May's nose wrinkled when she smiled, the way Mira reached for her sister's hand when she thought no one was looking. He realized then that whatever truth lay waiting, it was bound to these children. Later that morning, he saddled his horse. "I'll be gone a day or two," he told them. "You'll be safe here. There's food in the pantry, wood by the stove." Mira frowned. "Where you going, Pa?" He hesitated at the door. The words still felt foreign, too sacred to answer lightly. "Just need to ask about something," he said. The ride to town was long, the sky low and gray. At the post office, the old clerk searched through a box of forgotten mail, letters long undelivered. He found one bearing Eli's name, the ink blurred from water. The clerk handed it over with a shrug. "Been here years," he said. "Never could make out the address proper." Eli opened it right there on the porch. Inside, a short letter written in that same hand. "The river took me far, but not enough to drown my heart. If this finds you, know that our girls are safe. I'll return when the road allows. Keep faith." His hands shook. The ink was old, the words worn thin, but the truth rang clear. The girls are girls. When he rode home, the plains looked different. The sky seemed wider, the air lighter, as if some part of the world had been set right again. The twins were waiting at the fence, their faces bright when they saw him. Mira ran first, May close behind, both calling his name as they came. He lifted them into his arms, one on each side, feeling their small hearts thudding against his chest. The warmth of them chased the last of the winter cold from his bones. He didn't tell them what he'd found. Not yet. The truth could wait a little longer. That night, after they'd fallen asleep, he sat by the window watching snow drift across the yard. The letter lay folded in his pocket, a promise that would change everything. Tomorrow, he thought, he would ride again, not to escape the past, but to find it. Somewhere out there, Esther was alive, and the road between them had begun to open. The girls had brought her back to him in the only way the world knew how, through love, through blood, through faith that refused to die. As the last ember faded in the hearth, Eli felt the first quiet stirrings of hope take root. The wind outside eased to a whisper, the sound soft as breath. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the thoughts settle deep. Some stories don't end where we think they do. Some just wait for us to find the next chapter. Stay close, friend. Subscribe so you don't miss the next tale beneath the wide western sky.